could you just in like a couple of sentences explain what Compute Optimizer is for the folks who haven't seen it before?
Absolutely. So Compute Optimizer is a completely free tool and product that AWS provides in the console and via APIs that looks at all of your resource utilization and configuration data. So it looks at EC2 instances, auto scaling groups, EBS volumes, databases, and it takes a look at what instances you're using today. What's the
Mhm.
cost of those instances? What's the utilization? So CPU, memory, disk, network, IO, throughput, all of these utilization metrics. And then it takes a look at all of the available instance types you can choose from to size to. And then it does a performance analysis and says, of all of these instance types and sizes, which is the most cost efficient that has the highest performance that you need to meet the performance requirements of this workload? And so it does this analysis and gives you a resulting recommendation that says, this instance size is best. The M7i is the best instance type for your workload, or M8G, or right. And with over like 700 instance types available, it's really hard to pick the right one. And we didn't want people to have to do that one by one for every resource. So we built Compute Optimizer.
So this is like the homepage for Compute Optimizer, what people see at the start. And I already see, Rick, you've not done well. You've got some savings you could make. We could optimize this account way more.
We sure could. And I choose not to because I have to keep demoing. Yeah, we have our demo account. We leave it maybe not in the best state sometimes.
Yeah.
Uh, so we have a lot of stuff here. If you look at all of the places on the screen where it says new, you'll see on the left nav, auto scaling groups new, RDS databases new, idle resources new. These are all the
Yeah.
places where we've added new capability.
So yeah, we're going to kick off with those idle resources so we can start seeing things that are generally costing money that you're probably not engaging with and not utilizing that you could kind of stop or delete. I hopefully delete, but the idea being that you want to flag this because not everyone notices how inefficient some of the things are.
Yeah. So the first thing we did with the idle launch is we redid the homepage of Compute Optimizer. And so you'll see savings on the left and performance improvements on the right.
Yeah.
And these are recommendations where, hey, we're noticing utilization is very high and you're having resource constraints. CPU is hitting 100% over time, or you're having IOPS or throughput pain. And so we categorize those because one of the best ways to build trust with your engineering teams is to show that Compute Optimizer is actually designed first to manage the performance of your workloads and then second, save cost. So everybody likes to look at the number, but we think of optimization really as the balance between performance and cost together. So these two graphs are right next to each other to show the delta, or the yin and yang between uh, cost versus performance. So if you scroll down, you'll also see a table. This table is new, and you'll see that we look at all of the recommendation types by resource type. So you have EC2 auto-scaling groups, DBs, uh, EC2 instances, EBS volumes, so on and so forth. So we're going to go ahead. So we have some idle resources. You can either click on them here in this table, or you can go to the left nav and click on the idle resource view. So we're going to do that. We're going to take a look at all of my idle. I have a lot of idle resources.
Wow.
I have idle database, RDS databases. I have an ECS on Fargate idle resource. I have some idle EBS volumes. And then you can also see how many days of data was used to make the idle determination right here. And then you'll also see a little details button if you want more information on what's the utilization of these resource types. And so you can quickly see max CPU for this database is 11%. Max IOPS is 2.4. So definitely something that is idle. But let's dive into one of these. I'm gonna grab
Yeah.
this.
Let's go for the EBS. Yeah.
Yeah, let's do this EBS volume.
So it's what marked as idle, but what does that actually mean?
Yeah. So we talked to a lot of customers that wanted to understand, when you see an idle recommendation, how do I know that it's idle, or what your definition of idle is? So we added this button. Every time you look at an idle recommendation, you'll see this criteria button. and you can click on it, and it'll tell you the exact uh,
Ah,
definition of what criteria was met in order for this thing to be flagged as idle. Now,
yeah.
in this case, the volume isn't attached to any EC2 instance over 32 days. So that definition of idle for this volume. Uh,
Right.
so
And
it's
that's why there's no recommendations because there's nothing to do with it apart from get rid of it, right?
absolutely. And what's really interesting is there's no data because there's no attachment. This volume is sitting there unattached. And if I scroll down to all of the utilization data, there's not attached to anything. So this is really a cost. So in this case, the recommendation is that you snapshot the volume and consider deleting it. And this would give you, this volume is $8 a month. So individually, they're not incredibly expensive or anything, but collectively, you'll get in a situation where you might have hundreds or thousands of unattached volumes. And there's like some scripts that exist out there for people to do this scan themselves, but we really wanted to provide this in a user experience in the console where you can take a look at all of your idle resources across all of your accounts, right?
Yeah.
And so we just we really wanted to help customers do this idle cleanup without having to do scripting or custom work or anything like that. All right, so we're back here on the homepage. On the left nav, you'll see EC2 auto scaling groups, again with the new icon. So this just kind of gives you a bit of a description on what it is that changed here. The support now for mixed instance types. When an auto scaling group has a scaling policy, it's now supported with our recommendations. We're gonna go in here. I had a lot of savings. This is just demo environment, so I don't actually run an environment quite like this, but so you can see this estimated savings column. These are essentially all of these different auto scaling groups that we built out to for demo purposes. But what's interesting here is in EC2 right size recommendations, you might see a recommendation to save $100 or $200 a month. With an auto scaling group, you might have 50 instances in an auto scaling group or 10 or whatever. So the savings amount you get out of an auto scaling group recommendation can be a lot higher because you're talking about a group of EC2 instances that are all operating together as one unit. And so you're going to see a much higher savings dollar figure per scaling group in this area. Um, so we've configured a bunch of these auto scaling groups with different settings. So for example, we have some with mixed instance types where, they'll have M5s and M6s or a bunch of different types. We have some that are the same. Uh, and so we set up a bunch of different scenarios just to give examples of what it looks like in a real world environment where you might have a lot of auto scaling groups that are doing different things. You'd have different application teams. They're running different workloads. And so if we take a look at some of these, we can go into a lot of them. I'm going to go into, let's just, here's a single instance. And it says in this auto scaling group recommendation, our current configuration is a C5 for extra large.
Okay.
I was like, yeah, highly utilized, very popular,
Yeah.
but a little older.
Yeah.
And so we have a couple of options to change the instance type to a few different things. So we have a couple of graviton options here. You can also
What GD? What's the is that what's GD? To XG.
XG this graviton, but we can also uncheck the graviton box in this dropdown if you're not ready to go to graviton.
Yeah. Well, your application doesn't need it. You don't need all the graviton people being like, "I can't move." Okay, don't worry. We're looking at something else.
Go to this dropdown and unselect graviton. The recommendation will stay on x86 Intel-based type processors, so you don't have to really worry about any sort of architectural changes. So we can uncheck graviton, and now we're seeing a recommendation to go from C5 to either R6i, R5, or R7. And we changed how this works a little bit to say priority because you can add all three. The way an auto scaling group works is you can add or instance types to your auto scaling group as options. And a lot of companies did this, and we talked to a lot of companies that like adding a bunch of instance types to their auto scaling group because if there's a capacity issue and say R6i is not available for a few minutes in a region, you can add the next option. and then it'll pick that one, and you can set them to priority. And so there's like an allocation strategy option, which this will be recommended. We're looking at a single instance size ASG, so it says not applicable. But if you have an auto scaling group with a bunch of instance types, it will tell you to set the allocation strategy to prioritized, and then you can pick which instance types are prioritized first. And so you could put the highest efficiency ones at the top. And of course, just to repeat something we talked about earlier, Compute Optimizer is always picking instance types that will satisfy the performance requirements, right?
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
it's giving you these recommendations that have enough CPU, memory, disk, network that your application will be performant. And then it's giving you a priority order. So it really likes the R6i and the R5 extra larges, and it looks like they're the same price here. And then the third option is R7i extra large, which is just a tiny bit more expensive, but also a little faster on CPU. So you can just add all three of these instance types to your autoscaling group configuration, and it'll just pick up the highest priority one. And if that's not available, it will go down the list to the next one. And then there's this button called external metrics ingestion, which is something we launched. Actually, it was one of my first launches when I joined the company.
Was it? I didn't realize that. That's pretty
Yeah, and you can pick where you want to get memory data from. And the engineering team that built this is brilliant. They figured out and designed this so it's like literally a single click. You click what one of these APM products you have. So you
Yeah.
have Instana, and then you just click enable, and it turns on a data pipeline from Instana, a protected, completely secure, and totally free data pipeline from this company and your environment into Compute Optimizer. And then it has a link to that provider's website with the instructions on how to enable it on their side as well. So again, completely free way to ingest memory metrics, which we were so excited about this launch because getting that memory data increases the value of Compute Optimizer recommendations so much. 400% is not uncommon.
Yeah. The savings are crazy. It just enable it, and I think we used to have a early days, obviously, before this release, customer would be like, "But we're paying for this other service, we don't want to do CloudWatch." And now you don't have to.
So I clicked on the RDS databases nav on the left side. Again, you'll see the new button. Um, we now support Aurora MySQL and Aurora PostgreSQL database engines. So you'll see these in this DB cluster identifier. You'll be able to see what engine is running. And so you see Aurora MySQL. This will now show up. So if you're running any Aurora MySQL or PostgreSQL, you'll see that in here. You'll see a column for idle. So we have, as part of this feature, launched idle detection for all of your RDS and Aurora instances. And the idle definition for this one is a little more complicated because we get so much more data for an Aurora instance. So I can take a look at an idle equals true and show you what that looks like because it's interesting. Um, So here's the explanation, and you can feel free to dive into this. There's a learn more button as well. The complexity here is a little higher because we're looking at a lot more information to detect if something is idle. And you'll see that performance status is optimized and idle is a yes, because again, we don't downsize or provide recommendations to downsize memory capacity. And that's even more critical with databases because memory is very precious to databases. And so we're very sensitive here. And so if you have a certain amount of memory capacity, we will keep that the same. So you'll see different recommendations and options. In this case, it's telling you to do a generational upgrade from an R5 to an R7i. And then again, if you have any commitments or discounts, those will be factored in here. And in this case, it's the same price. So this is one of those things where we're saying, hey, you can get on faster hardware here for no additional cost increase. And then we're doing things like looking at DB load, memory utilization, database connections count, which is one of the criterias for idle. So we're doing a lot more than just looking at CPU when we're making these decisions in the Aurora space. Uh, Database connections count is one of those pieces of data that's really insightful to understand, is this thing idle? Is anybody connecting to it? Is anybody using it? as well as DB load. These are some of the metrics we're using to define idle.
Right.
What we noticed is, like, depending on the different CPU count and capacity, the idle utilized CPU utilization will be different because there's a certain amount of overhead that Aurora is using to manage and maintain itself and run.
Mhm.
And so the idle criteria is a little bit different for each size. And so that's why we're using sort of a combination and a complex definition of idle, that's CPU, DB load, DB connections, network, all of these things are factored in.
Just not one thing. Amazing.
It's a very complex, multi-dimensional definition of idle. You can see, like, all of the data that's pulled into Compute Optimizer to make this decision.
I
This
love that it's there. It's so helpful to make the decision because it's not just being like, "Oh, you should right size." There's actual, reasons behind it.
Yeah, gone are the days of right sizing on CPU average. So this is the cost optimization hub product, and again, like, whenever there's new recommendations, they'll they'll show up here as well. You'll see at the bottom the total savings you have. So for me in this demo environment is about 3,000 a month, split across a bunch of different recommendation types. It says here at the bottom, your estimated savings is 2,987 per month, which represents 23% of your last 30 days AWS spent.
Wait, where do you see the 23%? Oh, there. Okay.
Kind of small, and like, yeah, I want to do more here. Like, so we've got our brightest minds here thinking about how we what the future of measurement of optimization is. But when you're looking at all of the savings, and we have a lot of recommendations now, right? With EC2, auto scaling group, RDS, EBS, right? All of this stuff, it's difficult to know where to get started, right? And the complications of, okay, how difficult is the recommendation to execute
Mhm.
versus how much savings there is, and you have to constantly measure, where do I get started? So